Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and I just got to Vienna. Has me thinking about lots of things European, not a surprise. But of course, we do have a bunch of news, which is that the United Kingdom has yet another prime minister to look forward to, Andy Burnham, almost certainly the next PM now that Keir Starmer has resigned. And it wasn't that he had such an extraordinarily poor set of policies from the perspective of the British people. It's rather growing populism, anti-establishment sentiment, and no one that is looking managerial or technocratic is going to satisfy. We saw that on the right, and the Conservatives are now plummeting in their support at the polls. And now we're seeing it on the center left, and the Labour Party is plummeting in the polls. I don't expect that Andy Burnham is going to do all that much better. The policies that he supports on the fiscal side are going to be pretty aligned. Maybe he'll be more assertive in arguing for a return to the European common market. It certainly has been an issue that he has been more out there on than Starmer or most of his colleagues. But still, this is not imminent. As my friend, the former PM Rishi Sunak recently wrote, you better use the political capital you have very fast, because it's going to go away very quickly. And this is, a set of headlines post-Brexit UK, but also pretty much everywhere in Europe that we've been seeing lots and lots of weak leaders. In Germany, Merz is polling very badly, and his center-right party, the Christian Democrats, as well as the Social Democrats in coalition with him, might not last the year. In France, Macron has gone through government after government, has had huge problems putting budgets and legislation together, and he's deeply unpopular as he sputters towards the end of his term coming up next year. And it's true, the Europeans, they don't have economic growth, and they don't have the budget to provide the kind of support for an expanded social contract, an expansive social contract that the people have been demanding. The Draghi plan, which sort of lays out all of the things the Europeans could do to become more competitive and to grow, they're at best taking incremental measures that are going to matter a bit over a decade or more, but is not going to resolve any of these political challenges at home. So what do we make of the Europeans? Is this just going to fall apart as a model? And while the headlines are poor, I would at least provide a few counterpoints that are useful. First is that given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is felt by many Europeans, all the frontline Europeans, but certainly also the Brits, also the Germans, also the French, felt as a direct and massive security threat to them, both in terms of Ukraine needing to be able to defend itself, which they're now doing very, very well, but also in terms of the asymmetric attacks, the espionage attacks, and the like that so many European countries have had within their borders from Russia. On top of that, there are threats that are felt from the United States, that the United States is not only seen as unreliable, but is willing to go after the Europeans and cause pain, whether it's no longer providing big support for the Ukrainians and cutting them off briefly on intelligence, whether it's saying they want Greenland, that they want to own it, even though it's sovereign territory that belongs to a U.S. steadfast ally, Denmark. They come after the Europeans on trade, the launching of the Iran war, which hurt the Europeans a lot more than the United States economically. The technology front, having a kill switch that can suddenly shut down availability and access to American firms and governments to advanced models. All of this make the Europeans feel like they must have a more cohesive and stronger and expansive Europe. And also the fact that in Hungary, you have the removal with a constitutional majority now of the most Eurosceptic leader, Viktor Orban, with Peter Magyar, who is very interested in further expansion of the EU, wants to join the Eurozone himself in terms of Hungary, and is no longer a big bloc on the Europeans pushing forward with additional pieces of legislation and support. Then you have the reality that the Ukrainians are no longer just a negative for the Europeans and a vulnerability. They're the ones that are investing big in AI and in defense capabilities. They have the strongest military of all of Europe. They are a big component of strength in terms of innovation for the Europeans as a whole. They're placed to invest long term, not to mention the fact that they're actually pushing the Russians back. If you had to invest money for 10 years in Europe in one sector that you couldn't move, you'd do a lot worse than to invest in Ukrainian AI and defense. And the Germans are certainly doing that, and the French are starting to do that, and others will as well. And that's a almost 50 million person population that will integrate into the EU and will be a point of strength. And then finally, the fact that the Europeans don't have a lot of entrepreneurship and they have a lot of regulatory challenges. And so it's hard to attract lots of investment into Europe. And that's a persistent problem. But they do have a better sense of quality of life. And this is important to me because if the United States and if the world is moving increasingly to an environment where labor does not matter as much for the accumulation of capital, and therefore a whole bunch of people are going to get really mad and really scared of new technology. Well, the Americans turn out to be the most angry of AI of any of the advanced industrial economies. And the reason is because a whole bunch of Americans think it's a threat to them. Because if what it means to be successful, what it means to have a full life in the United States is, what do you do and how much money you make? It's the first question that people ask an American or anyone at a bar in the United States. What do you do? Right? It's the identity question of who you are. You wouldn't ask that question in Europe. And yet, that is increasingly going to be very difficult for a lot of Americans to align with if it turns out there just isn't that kind of labor available, those kinds of jobs available for those people. Those aspirations don't align with what you want to accomplish. And yet the Europeans don't have those questions. They have questions that are much more holistic about what it means to be part of society and part of a community. And by the way, European governance on those issues is pretty aligned. So, for example, there was a big pushback in Europe before the American pushback on immigration. And you now see both the right and the left. I mean, so the UK, for example, Denmark, for example, being much tougher on immigration with center-left governments than either center-left or right would have been 10 or 20 years ago. And it's because that's the way the Europeans feel as a whole. And even though individual European government leaders are very weak, the EU as a whole has a fairly coherent set of policy principles that are generally oriented around the center-right, and they're generally focused on the same sort of answers on border security, on common security, on social contract, and on what it means to be European. And there are all sorts of differences. Europe is, no more cohesive as a whole than the United States is. Find lots of different people, lots of different entities and views, and yet What it means to be European today has less of an internal identity crisis than what it means to be American does in the United States. None of this is to make me believe that Europe is suddenly going to hit above its weight geopolitically. Its power base is not becoming suddenly much greater than it has been over the past 10, 20 years. But it's not falling apart. Nobody's pushing for exit. A lot more countries are interested in coming in or increasing their integration or in perhaps reassessing the Brexit that has hurt the UK economy so much over the past decade. They just had that 10-year anniversary, if you can believe it. And that means that Europe is not falling apart. It's not really a museum. And increasingly, it's a place that Americans can learn at least a little from. And that is not something that we see talked about very much in the United States these days. So anyway, an interesting couple of points, I think, while I just landed here in Vienna, and I'll have a bunch of meetings that I'll be looking forward to engaging with on this and on plenty of other issues over the next couple days. And see you all real soon.